Good morning, everybody. I am the spokesperson for the Irish Association of Funeral Directors, and this is about the changing role of the funeral director in Ireland. Undertaking became a profession in the mid-1800s in Ireland. Prior to this, each role was carried out by the individual supplier of the item or the service. So, for example, the coffin was purchased from the carpenter, the shroud or the habit was purchased from the seamstress, transport was supplied by the stables or the posting establishments, and laying out the body was done normally by the neighbours or the hospital nurses or somebody like that, and graves were generally dug by the neighbours. These tasks were taken on or undertaken by one entity, which was the funeral undertaker. They maintained the stock of coffins, habits, supplies, hearses and carriages, and all those things. In the 1900s, there were changes noticed about how things were dealt with in the cities or in the rural areas. In the cities, the families began to rely on the undertakers, and in the outskirts then people would go to an agent who would bring them to the city to make the arrangements with the funeral directors there at the time. This ceased around the 1960s, and one of the things that they were specifically they would do for families specifically was that well-off families would have the undertaker would insert the death notice in the local or the national or even the international press to let people know. And things changed, and then also I think we will have further talk on it, but for example, floral tributes, both artificial and fresh, became very popular at this time. And fresh flowers were quite expensive then, so plastic flowers were used, and this led on to silk flowers. And we see nowadays again people going back to the fresh flowers, though maybe in more restrained quantities. Removals were normally on the day of death when the person died, and burial was normally the following day. So the removal meant leaving the residence or the hospital mortuary, travelling to the church in the evening where the body would rest or repose for 1 or 2 nights. And the burial would generally be the following day after the Requiem Mass. Normally the closing in or the covering of the grave would take place after the graveside prayers, and this would be done usually by all the men who were in attendance. And after this, as still the practice today, people would travel after the grave is closed in. They would travel to the local pub or hotel or restaurant, and this was the idea was to quench the thirst of all the men who had helped in filling in the grave on the day, and also to give an opportunity to recount stories about the life of the deceased. The single biggest change that came around was in the early 70s with the introduction of funeral homes, and this phenomenon came from the United States, and it was firstly adopted in all the cities. It was an overnight hit because of practicality and functionality. It suited people. And in Limerick here, for example, Griffin's opened the first funeral home here in 1974, and it was very, very well received and accepted by everybody at the time. So the era of the cold and miserable and drab hospital mortuary was replaced by new comfortable facilities where the public could visit and convey their condolences to the bereaved in a dignified manner. The facilities existed alongside with hospital mortuaries for many years, but at this stage most of these have ceased because of, again, practical and comfort reasons. This change brought the alteration in that what was an undertaker is now known as a funeral director, and the funeral director became a one-stop shop for all things to do with handling the dead. From the moment of death through the days of the funeral and far beyond, they were called upon to organise anything that the bereaved family would wish. And the expectations of the family and the public to view their deceased is now greater than ever. In the past, the condition of the deceased person was usually the responsibility of the hospital staff or of the neighbours, and this has changed when the funeral home came on stream. So now funeral directors are expected to make sure that the remains were suitably prepared, and generally for open coffin viewing is our tradition in Ireland. This practice is particularly strong here, and also outside the cities especially, people are willing in Ireland to queue for hours to commiserate and to see a friend or a relative or a colleague for the last time. So the modern funeral director must be able to multitask. They must go from being a compassionate listener to being a mechanic and possibly a counsellor, a computer wizard or a family mediator at times. The modern world has brought great advantages to funeral directing like everything else. For example, communication methods like the internet have allowed us now to send details of a funeral to a loved one in any part of the globe. And we can even stream the funeral on websites live to family who can't attend at the time. So what will the future bring? Will cremation take over from the traditional earth burial that we always had in Ireland? Or will alkaline hydrolysis replace cremation? Will we send our loved ones' ashes to outer space, or will we compress their ashes into wearable diamonds? I think it's important to remember that the Irish are very well known worldwide for the Irish wake. If you go to any country, if you go to America or Australia or anywhere in the world and you mention an Irish wake, everybody knows exactly what you're talking about. And there's a great respect for the way that the Irish appreciate and celebrate the life of those who have died. And it's something that's it's a huge part of our tradition. It should be kept. And I do think that whatever comes down the road, as funeral directors, we will be ready and able for that. I won't delay you too long. I just have a few slides to just show a few points to people. First of all, from the 70s to the year 2000 roughly, funeral homes came in. They replaced mortuaries traditionally in Ireland, and the home wakes disappeared quite a lot at that time. And it's interesting at the moment that they have now become popular again in Ireland. People are now bringing the body back to the house more than ever before. Other changes were that personal clothing, wearing a person's suit or whatever outfit you'd like them to wear, replaced the use of habits or shrouds, which would have been the traditional thing to use. Again, music is now considered at the Requiem Mass, and people have a say in what they would like to do. They're allowed to say, most places they're allowed to eulogize about the person. They can have a participation in the Mass itself. And then memorializing and commemorating the person has become very important. And obviously the presentation of the body as well as to how the person will look and how they'll be seen. Regarding the trends, there was in the 70s and 80s the whole idea of honoring the dead and of speaking about them, bringing them into the fore and talking about their life and all the good things they did. Over the next 20 years or so, the idea of personalising the funeral, which is where we are now. And we see, for example, in floral tributes that would be very unique, or the way a person would choose to have the route going to the church or cemetery, or using photographs or videos to show and to highlight the person who has died along the way to the family. These are all a way of personalising the funeral to themselves. As I mentioned, what is next to come? Direct cremation is one thing where people don't have any service whatsoever and the person goes for immediate cremation. Cryonics is obviously freezing the body. Alkaline hydrolysis is a new method of cryonics where the person is frozen and then this is shattered into something like the ashes that come out in cremation. And then obviously green burials are very current at the moment and very topical now. In the future, I suppose cremation, mainly because of the cost of land in lots of places in the world, not so much here, but in any major cities in the world, you cannot afford to buy a plot of land, a grave to bury somebody who has died. Cremation is the main option in those places because it comes down to cost really. And obviously that leads to reduction in earth burial. It's not as relevant in Ireland where our land costs would be different to the likes of London or New York or Moscow or cities like that. We are becoming more individual in Ireland, and obviously we're becoming a little less religious, so the reduction in church services is noticed. And also in personalised services, as I mentioned, people are choosing what clothes they want the deceased to wear. They're picking the music they want to be exact, in particular to reflect the person who's died. And the prayers and all the words that will be said will be very much thought about, and particularly about the person. And finally, the challenges to come. We will always be facing regulation in all types of, in every business in the country, and obviously families' requests will oppose regulation in certain places. For example, up to last year it was illegal to bury somebody in Ireland without using a coffin. Now this didn't work with certain faiths, the Muslim faith for example, and this was against the law, and it was changed last year just to take that illegality out of it. But the regulations are there and we must abide by them. And often you would have people that would want personal thoughts. The family would have special requests that they may like to spend the night in the funeral home with the deceased member. That may not be possible. They might like to bury somebody in their own garden. That's not possible. There is always going to be rules that have to be stuck to as well. Increasing cost of services is obviously a part of everything in life, with labour, water, energy, insurance, everything plays a part of it. And regarding burial, obviously land prices is going to be the main problem there. We see alternative funerals where people would have humanist services, or we have many, many religions in the country now, in all parts of Ireland, like everywhere else. And DIY funerals, then they wouldn't be that popular, but it is possible for somebody to go and to purchase a grave when someone has died, to go and maybe if they know nurses or somebody who's involved in that profession, to have somebody to lay out the body, to have it at home, to use their own car or their own van to handle the funeral. It is possible. It doesn't happen too often, but DIY funerals are an option. And obviously then multicultures and specific religious needs. We have so many different religions, so many different cultures in the country, where in certain religions people would wash the body themselves. In certain places the way the funeral is conducted from start to finish obviously comes down to the person's religious beliefs. So that's just what I wanted to say to you. Thank you very much, and I hope it's of interest to everybody.